To highlight some of the differences that exist on both sides of the dais, and perhaps even some of the differences that exist within our own sides. The proper role of government funding in scientific research. The issue has never been more timely. The majority, the Democrats, are allowing a number of critical research and development tax credits to expire by refusing to compromise on other tax issues, on a tax extender bill that should otherwise be enjoying bipartisan support. But the majority's refusal to acknowledge the economic constraints in which we find ourselves as a nation and pay for the spending that is in that legislation. Now, for a long time, certainly I felt that the proper role of government in funding research and development and a host of issues from medical research to energy policy is when the government removes impediments towards advances in science and technology, and sometimes that means providing some measure of tax relief. Government funding that inherently comes with strings attached really wasn't needed in the field of cell phones. The private market drove those innovations, and today we have smaller, sleeker cell phones being released every month. I shudder to think what would have happened had the government been in charge of that, and those big, boxy, clunky things we had back in the 80s might still be the state of the art. Now, all the work done at the National Institute of Health that has been done on genetics and personalized medicine with the mapping of the human genome, what's the real promise for medicine in the future? Government funding was the first step. But now it certainly is the private sector that is moving faster and faster than the government. And it is clear that at least in the issue of genomic medicine, government funding was necessary to get the ball rolling and will be necessary in its initial development phase. Few in the private sector had the stomach to venture into previously uncharted territory of genomics, and the government initiated the research, but it will no doubt lead to the private sector and spurring the private sector to actually develop and deliver on that promise. I was not a member of Congress during the 1990s. I was just a regular guy. But the Congress of the late 1990s, under the leadership of Speaker Gingrich, when the Senate failed to pass a balanced budget amendment by one vote, they decided to get to work and play like there was a balanced budget amendment and work toward a balanced budget in the House of Representatives. But at the same time, they assigned priorities. We know the history shows that they were successful in achieving that balanced budget, but they did assign priorities because in those same years that they achieved a balanced budget in 2 years, when they thought it would be 7 and the administration said it would be 10, they assigned priorities. They doubled spending at the National Institute of Health. So it is possible to control federal spending and fund those areas that are a priority for our future, to make those investments that are a priority for our future. The other instance that I would reference would be the development of what's called hydraulic fracturing in the tight shale, alternative shale formations. Certainly been an economic blessing in my part of the world in a shale formation known as the Barnett Shale. It protected our area from the recession for a full year. The country entered into a recession in December of 2007, but it was really December of 2008 before we really felt that in Fort Worth, Texas, and that's because of the energy activity that was going on, because of a federal research and development grant from 15 years prior that allowed the development of that as an energy resource. And now it has changed the equation and changed the discussion about energy production in this country, because so many of these formations exist around within our continental United States. To be sure, we have to be careful about the environmental impacts as we now benefit from the economic impacts, and that is an issue that will continue to require work and will continue to require some federal involvement. But the federal government planted the seed with research and development 15 years ago, and the private sector took off and developed the resource. So federal funding can be an important part of finding a solution to a number of the world's problems, but too often we put such a reliance on government spending, and then we kind of forget that the private sector really can do a better job at some of these issues than the federal government. We end up picking winners and losers. I would just reference what's going on now in the field of electronic medical records. Probably not part of this discussion because it was in the stimulus bill, but almost everyone carries a smartphone nowadays. The smartphone is the platform. Why don't we allow the applications to be built for medical purposes around the platform that already exists? Instead, we have the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology, or the Office of National Coordinator, developing this extraordinarily complex set of rules regarding meaningful users and meaningful use, and we may find that we end up with less use than we would have gotten had we simply developed the platform and then gotten out of the way. But anyway, I look forward to hearing our witnesses today, and I will yield back the balance of my time.
I thank my colleagues for their testimony and for being here today. And before I introduce today's panel, I would